Chapter 21. The Seven Martyrs of Tehran. The news of the tragic fate which had befallen the heroes of Tabasi brought immeasurable sorrow to the heart of the Bab. Confined in his prison castle of Shirik, severed from the little band of his struggling disciples, he watched with keen anxiety the progress of their labors and prayed with unremitting zeal for their victory. How great was his sorrow when, in the early days of Shaban in the year A.H. 1265, the 22nd of June to the 21st of July, A.D. 1849, he came to learn of the trials that had beset their path, of the agony they had suffered, of the betrayal to which an exasperated enemy had felt compelled to resort, and of the abominable butchery with which their career had ended. The Bab was heartbroken, his amanuensis Sayyid Hussein-i-Aziz subsequently related, at the receipt of this unexpected intelligence. He was crushed with grief, a grief that stilled his voice and silenced his pen. For 9 days he refused to meet any of his friends. I myself, though his close and constant attendant, was refused admittance. Whatever meat or drink we offered him, he was disinclined to touch. Tears rained continually from his eyes, and expressions of anguish dropped unceasingly from his lips. I could hear him, from behind the curtain, give vent to his feelings of sadness as he communed in the privacy of his cell with his beloved. I attempted to jot down the effusions of his sorrow as they poured forth from his wounded heart. Suspecting that I was attempting to preserve the lamentations he bade me destroy whatever I had recorded. Nothing remains of the moans and cries with which that heavy-laden heart sought to relieve itself of the pangs that had seized it. For a period of 5 months he languished, immersed in an ocean of despondency and sorrow. With the advent of Muharram in the year A.H. 1266, the 17th of November, the 17th of December, A.D. 1849, the Bab again resumed the work he had been compelled to interrupt. The first page he wrote was dedicated to the memory of Mullah Hussein. In the visiting tablet revealed in his honor, he extolled, in moving terms, the unswerving fidelity with which he served Qudus throughout the siege of the fort of Tabasi. He lavished his eulogies on his magnanimous conduct, recounted his exploits, and asserted his undoubted reunion in the world beyond with the leader whom he had so nobly served. He too, he wrote, would soon join those twin immortals, each of whom had, by his life and death, shed imperishable lustre on the faith of God. For 1 whole week the Bab continued to write his praises of Qudus, of Mullah Hussein, and of his other companions who had gained the crown of martyrdom at Tabasi. No sooner had he completed his eulogies of those who had immortalized their names in the defense of the fort than he summoned, on the day of Ashura, Mullah Azi Ghuzul, one of the believers of Maraghi, who for the last 2 months had been acting as his attendant instead of Sayyid Hassan, the brother of Sayyid Hussein-i-Aziz. There are 2 footnotes here. First, for Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, the anniversary of the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein, which fell in that year on the 26th of November, A.D. 1849, and the footnote for Mullah Adi Ghuzal. He had acted as the servant of the Bab in Maku, ranked among his leading companions, and subsequently embraced the message of Baha'u'llah. The Bab affectionately received him, bestowed upon him the name of Sayyah, entrusted to his care the visiting tablets he had revealed in memory of the martyrs of Tabasi, and bade him perform on his behalf a pilgrimage to that spot. Arise, he urged him, and with complete detachment proceed, in the guise of a traveller, to Mazindaran, and there visit on my behalf the spot which enshrines the bodies of those immortals who, with their blood, have sealed their faith in my cause. As you approach the precincts of that hallowed ground, put off your shoes, and bowing your head in reverence to their memory, invoke their names and prayerfully make the circuit of their shrine. Bring back to me, as a remembrance of your visit, a handful of that holy earth which covers the remains of my beloved ones, Qudus and Mullah Hussein. Strive to be back ere the day of Nowruz, that you may celebrate with me that festival, the only one I probably shall ever see again. Faithful to the instructions he had received, Sayyah set out on his pilgrimage to Mazindaran. He reached his destination on the first day of Rabiul Awwal in the year AH 1266, the 15th of January, AD 1850, and by the 9th day of that same month, the 23rd of January, AD 1850, the first anniversary of the martyrdom of Mullah Hussein, he had performed his visit and acquitted himself of the mission with which he had been entrusted. From thence he proceeded to Tehran. I have heard Aqi-i Kalim, who received Sayyar at the entrance of Baha'u'llah's home in Tehran, relate the following. It was the depth of winter when Sayyar, returning from his pilgrimage, came to visit Baha'u'llah. Despite the cold and snow of a rigorous winter, he appeared attired in the garb of a dervish, poorly clad, barefooted, and dishevelled. His heart was set afire with the flame that pilgrimage had enkindled. No sooner had Syed Yahya-i Darabi, surnamed Wahid, who was then a guest in the home of Baha'u'llah, been informed of the return of Sayyar from the fort of Tabasi, than he, oblivious of the pomp and circumstance to which a man of his position had been accustomed, rushed forward and flung himself at the feet of the pilgrim. Holding his legs, which had been covered with mud to the knees, in his arms, he kissed them devoutly. I was amazed that day at the many evidences of loving solicitude which Baha'u'llah evinced towards Wahid. He showed him such favours as I had never seen him extend to anyone. The manner of his conversation left no doubt in me that this same Wahid would ere long distinguish himself by deeds no less remarkable than those which had immortalized the defenders of the fort of Tabasi. Sayyar tarried a few days in that home. He was, however, unable to perceive, as did Wahid, the nature of that power which lay latent in his host. Though himself the recipient of the utmost favour from Baha'u'llah, he failed to apprehend the significance of the blessings that were being showered upon him. I have heard him recount his experiences during his sojourn in Famagusta. Baha'u'llah overwhelmed me with his kindness. As to Wahid, notwithstanding the eminence of his position, he invariably gave me preference over himself whenever in the presence of his host. On the day of my arrival from Mazindaran, he went so far as to kiss my feet. I was amazed at the reception accorded me in that home. And though immersed in an ocean of bounty, I failed in those days to appreciate the position then occupied by Baha'u'llah, nor was I able to suspect, however dimly, the nature of the mission he was destined to perform. Ere the departure of Sayyar from Tehran, Baha'u'llah entrusted him with an epistle, the text of which he had dictated to Mirza Yahya and sent it in his name. The footnote here says of Yahya, surnamed Sub-i Azal. Shortly after, a reply penned in the Bab's own handwriting, in which he commits Mirza Yahya to the care of Baha'u'llah and urges that attention be paid to his education and training, was received. That communication, the people of the Bayan, and the footnote here says followers of Mirza Yahya, have misconstrued as an evidence of the exaggerated claims which they have advanced in favour of their leader. And a footnote here says, the claims of this young man were based on a nomination document now in the possession of Professor Brown and have been supported by a letter given in a French version by Monsieur Nicolas. Forgery, however, has played such a great part in written documents of the East that I hesitate to recognize the genuineness of this nomination, and I think it very improbable that any company of intensely earnest men should have accepted the documents in preference to the evidence of their own knowledge respecting the inadequate endowments of Sub-i Azal. The probability is that the arrangement already made was further sanctioned, viz. That Baha'u'llah was for the present to take the private direction of affairs and exercise his great gifts as a teacher, while Sub-i Azal, a vain young man, gave his name as ostensible head, especially with a view to outsiders and to agents of the government. From Dr. T.K. Chain's The Reconciliation of Races and Religions, pages 118 to 19. Although the text of that reply is absolutely devoid of such pretensions and does not, beyond the praise it bestows upon Baha'u'llah and the request it makes for the upbringing of Mirza Yahya, contain any reference to his alleged position, yet his followers have idly imagined that that letter constitutes an assertion of the authority with which they have invested him. At this stage of my narrative, when I have already recounted the outstanding events that occurred in the course of the year AH 1265, AD 1848-9, I am reminded that that very year witnessed the most significant event in my own life, an event which marked my spiritual rebirth, my deliverance from the fetters of the past, and my acceptance of the message of this revelation. I seek the indulgence of the reader if I dwell too long on the circumstances of my early life, and recount with too great detail the events that led to my conversion. My father belonged to the tribe of Tahiri, who led a nomadic life in the province of Khorasan. His name was Ghulam Ali, son of Hussein-i-Arab. He married the daughter of Kalb Ali, and by her had 3 sons and 3 daughters. I was his second son, and was given the name of Yar Muhammad. I was born on the 18th of Safar in the year AH 1247, 29th of July AD 1831, in the village of Zarand. I was a shepherd by profession, and was given in my early days a most rudimentary education. I longed to devote more time to my studies, but was unable to do so, owing to the exigencies of my situation. I read the Quran with eagerness, committed several of its pages to memory, and chanted them whilst I followed my flock over the fields. I loved solitude, and watched the stars at night with delight and wonder. In the quiet of the wilderness, I recited certain prayers attributed to the Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful, and as I turned my face towards the Qibla, supplicated the Almighty to guide my steps and enable me to find the truth. My father oftentimes took me with him to Qum, where I became acquainted with the teachings of Islam and the ways and manners of its leaders. I was a devout follower of that faith, and was closely associated with the ecclesiastical leaders who congregated in that city. I watched him as he prayed at the Masjid-i-Imam Hassan, and performed with scrupulous care and extreme piety all the rites and ceremonies prescribed by his faith. I heard the preaching of several eminent mujtahids who had arrived from Najaf, attended their lectures, and listened to their disputations. Gradually I came to perceive their insincerity, and to loathe the baseness of their character. Eager as I was to ascertain the trustworthiness of the creeds and dogmas which they strove to impose upon me, I could neither find the time nor obtain the facilities with which to satisfy my desire. I was often rebuked by my father for my temerity and restlessness. "I fear," he often remarked, "that your aversion to these mujtahids may some day involve you in great difficulties and bring upon you reproach and shame." I was in the village of Rubat Karim on a visit to my maternal uncle when, on the 12th day after Nowruz in the year AH 1263, AD 1847, I accidentally overheard in the masjid of that village a conversation between 2 men, which the first made me acquainted with the revelation of the Bab. "Have you heard," one of them remarked, "that the Sayyidi Bab has been conducted to the village of Kinar Girt and is on his way to Tehran?" Finding his friend ignorant of that episode, he proceeded to relate the whole story of the Bab, giving a detailed account of the circumstances attending his declaration, of his arrest in Shiraz, his departure for Isfahan, the reception which both the Imam Jumi and the Manushir Khan had extended to him, the prodigies and wonders he had manifested, and the verdict that the ulamas of Isfahan had pronounced against him. Every detail of that story excited my curiosity and stirred in me a keen admiration for a man who could throw such a spell over his countrymen. His light seemed to have flooded my soul. I felt as if I were already a convert to his cause. From Rubat Karim I returned to Zarand. My father remarked upon my restlessness and expressed his surprise at my behavior. I had lost my appetite and sleep, and was determined to conceal the secret of my inner agitation from my father, lest its disclosure might interfere with the eventual realization of my hopes. I remained in that state until a certain Sayyid Hussein-i-Zavari arrived in Zarand, and was able to enlighten me on a subject which had become the ruling passion of my life. Our acquaintance speedily ripened into a friendship which encouraged me to share with him the longings of my heart. To my great surprise, I found him already enthralled by the secret of the theme which I had begun to disclose to him. One of my cousins, he proceeded to relate, Sayyid Ismail-i-Zaveri by name, convinced me of the truth of the message proclaimed by the Sayyidi Bab. He informed me that he had several times met the Sayyidi Bab in the house of the Imam Jumi of Isfahan, and had seen him actually reveal, in the presence of his host, a commentary on the Suri of Val Asr. Footnote here says from the Quran 103. The rapidity of the Bab's composition and the force and originality of his style had excited his surprise and admiration. He was amazed to find that, whilst revealing his commentary, and without lessening the speed of his writing, he was able to answer whatever questions those who were present were moved to ask him. The fearlessness with which my cousin arose to preach the message aroused the hostility of the Karkudas and Seyyids of Zavari, who compelled him to return to Isfahan, where he had of late been residing. I, too, unable to remain in Zavari, departed for Kashan, in which town I spent the winter, and met Haji Mirza Jani, of whom my cousin had spoken, and who gave me a treatise written by the Bab entitled Rizali-i-Adliye, urging me to read it carefully and return it to him after a few days. I was so charmed by the theme and language of that treatise that I proceeded immediately to transcribe the whole text. When I returned it to its owner, he, to my profound regret, informed me that I had just missed the opportunity of meeting its author. The Sayyidi Bab himself, he said, arrived on the eve of the day of Nowruz and spent 3 nights as a guest in my home. He is now on his way to Tehran, and if you start immediately, you will certainly overtake him. Straightway I rose and departed, walking all the way from Kashan to a fortress in the neighborhood of Kinar-Gird. I was resting under the shadow of its walls when a pleasant-looking man emerged from that fortress and asked me who I was and whither I was going. I am a poor Seyyid, I replied, a wayfarer and stranger to this place. He took me to his home and invited me to spend the night as his guest. In the course of his conversation with me, he said, I suspect you to be a follower of the Seyyid who was staying for a few days in this fortress, from whence he was transferred to the village of Kulain, and who 3 days ago left for Azerbaijan. I esteem myself as one of his adherents. My name is Haji Zainul Abidin. I intended not to separate myself from him, but he bade me remain in this place and convey to any of his friends whom I might meet his loving greetings and dissuade them from following him. Tell them, he instructed me, to consecrate their lives to the service of my cause, that haply the barriers that hinder the progress of this faith may be removed, so that my followers may, with safety and freedom, worship their God and observe the precepts of their faith. I immediately abandoned my project, and instead of returning to Qum, decided to come to this place. The story which this Sayyid Hussein Zavari related to me served to allay my agitation. He shared with me the copy of the Rizali-i-Adliye he had brought with him, the readings of which imparted strength and refreshment to my soul. In those days I was a pupil of a Sayyid who taught me the Quran, and whose incapacity to enlighten me on the tenets of his faith became more and more evident in my eyes. Sayyid Hussein, whom I asked for further information about the cause, advised me to meet Sayyid Ismail-i Zavari, whose invariable practice it was to visit every spring the shrines of the Imam Zadis of Qum. I induced my father, who was reluctant to separate himself from me, to send me to that city with the object of perfecting my knowledge of the Arabic language. I was careful to conceal from him my real purpose, fearing that its disclosure might involve him in embarrassments with the Qadi and the Ulamas of Zarand and prevent me from achieving my end. While I was in Qum, my mother, my sister, and my brother came to visit me in connection with the festival of Nowruz, and stayed with me for about a month. In the course of their visit, I was able to enlighten my mother and my sister about the new revelation, and succeeded in kindling in their breasts the love of its author. A few days after their return to Zarand, Sayyid Ismail, whom I impatiently awaited, arrived, and was able, in the course of his discussions with me, to set forth in detail all that was required to win me over completely to the cause. He laid stress on the continuity of divine revelation, asserted the fundamental oneness of the prophets of the past, and explained their close relationship to the mission of the Bab. He also disclosed the nature of the work accomplished by Sheikh Ahmad-i-Asai and Sayyid Kazim Rashti, of neither of whom I had previously heard. I asked as to the duty incumbent at the present time upon every loyal adherent of the faith. The injunction of the Bab, he replied, is that all those who have accepted his message should proceed to Mazindaran and lend their assistance to Qudus, who is now hemmed in by the forces of an unrelenting foe. I expressed my eagerness to join him, as he himself was intending to journey to the fort of Tabasi. He advised me, however, to remain in Qum together with a certain Mirza Fathullah-i Hakak, a lad of my age whom he had recently guided to the cause, until the receipt of his message from Tehran. I waited in vain for that message, and finding that no word came from him, decided to leave for the capital. My friend Mirza Fathullah subsequently followed me. He was eventually arrested and shared the fate of those who were put to death in the year AH 1268, AD 1851-2, as a result of the attempt on the life of the Shah. Arriving in Tehran, I proceeded directly to the Masjid-i-Shah, which was opposite the Madrasa, at the entrance of which I later on unexpectedly encountered Syed Ismail-i Zavari, who hastened to inform me that he had just written me the letter and was on the point of dispatching it to Qum. We were preparing ourselves to leave for Mazindaran when the news reached us that the defenders of the fort of Tabasi had been treacherously slaughtered, and that the fort itself had been levelled with the ground. We were filled with distress at the receipt of the appalling news, and mourned the tragic fate of those who had so heroically defended their beloved cause. One day I unexpectedly came across my maternal uncle, Noruz Ali, who had come on purpose to fetch me. I informed Syed Ismail, who advised me to leave for Zarand and not to arouse further hostility on the part of those who insisted upon my return. On my arrival at my native village, I was able to win over my brother to the cause, which my mother and my sister had already embraced. I also succeeded in inducing my father to allow me to leave again for Tehran. I took up my residence in the same madrasa where I had been accommodated on my previous visit, and there met a certain Mullah Abdul Karim, whom, I subsequently learned, Baha'u'llah had named Mirza Ahmad. He affectionately received me and told me that Syed Ismail had entrusted me to his care, and wished me to remain in his company until the former's return to Tehran. The days of my companionship with Mirza Ahmad will never be forgotten. I found him the very incarnation of love and kindness. The words which he inspired in me and animated my faith are indelibly graven upon my heart. Through him I was introduced to the disciples of the Bab, with whom I associated, and from whom I obtained full information regarding the teachings of the faith. Mirza Ahmad was in those days earning his livelihood as a scribe, and devoted his evenings to copying the Persian Bayan and other writings of the Bab. The copies which he so devotedly prepared were given by him as gifts to his fellow disciples. I myself was several times the bearer of such gifts from him to the wife of Mullah Midi-i Kandi, who had forsaken his infant son and hastened to join the occupants of the fort at Tabasi. During those days I was informed that Tahiri, who ever since the dispersal of the gathering at Badasht had been living in Nur, had arrived at Tehran and was confined in the house of Mahmud Khan-i Kalantar, where, although a prisoner, she was treated with consideration and courtesy. One day, Mirza Ahmad conducted me to the house of Baha'u'llah, whose wife, the Barakatul Ulliya, the mother of the Most Great Branch, had already healed my eyes with an ointment which she herself had prepared and sent to me by this same Mirza Ahmad. 2 footnotes here. First, of the Barakatul Ulliya, literally the most exalted leaf, and also the Most Great Branch. It says the title of Abdul Baha. The first one I met in that house was that same beloved son of hers, who was then a child of 6. He smiled his welcome to me as he was standing at the door of the room which Baha'u'llah occupied. I passed that door and was ushered into the presence of Mirza Yahya, utterly unaware of the station of the occupant of the room I had just left behind me. When brought face to face with Mirza Yahya, I was startled. Immediately I observed his features and noted his conversation, at his utter unworthiness of the position that had been claimed for him. On another occasion, when I visited that same house, I was on the point of entering the room that Mirza Yahya occupied when Aqi Kalim, whom I had previously met, approached and requested me, since Isfandiyar, their servant, had gone to market and had not yet returned, to conduct Akka to the Madrasi-i Mirza Saleh in his stead, and then return to this place. A footnote here says of Akka, meaning master, by which the title Abdul Baha was then designated. I gladly consented, and as I was preparing to leave, I saw the Most Great Branch, a child of exquisite beauty, wearing the kula and cloak in the Jubi-i-Hizari, emerge from the room which his father occupied and descend the steps leading to the gate of the house. And another footnote here says of the Jubi-i-Hizari, a kind of overcoat. I advanced and stretched forth my arms to carry him. "We shall walk together," he said as he took hold of my hand and led me out of the house. We chatted together as we walked hand in hand in the direction of the madrisi, known in those days by the name of Pa Minar. As we reached his classroom, he turned to me and said, "Come again this afternoon and take me back to my home, for Isfandiar is unable to fetch me. My father will need him today." I gladly acquiesced and returned immediately to the house of Baha'u'llah. There again I met Mirza Yahya, who delivered into my hands a letter which he asked me to take to the Madrisi-i-Sadr and hand to Baha'u'llah, whom I was told I would find in the room occupied by Mullah Bakir-i-Bastami. He asked me to bring back the reply immediately. I fulfilled the commission and returned to the Madrisi in time to conduct the Most Great Branch to his home. One day, Mirza Ahmad invited me to meet Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, the Bab's maternal uncle, who had recently returned from Chirik and was staying in the home of Muhammad Beg-i-Chaparchi, in the neighborhood of the gate of Shimiran. I was struck when I gazed at his face with the nobility of his features and the serenity of his countenance. My subsequent visits to him served to heighten my admiration for the sweetness of his temper, his mystical piety and strength of character. I well remember how on one occasion Akhe-i-Kalim urged him at a certain gathering to leave Tehran, which was then in a state of great ferment, and escape its dangerous atmosphere. "Why fear for my safety?" he confidently replied. "Would that I too could share in the banquet which the hand of Providence is spreading for his chosen ones." Shortly after, the stirrers-up of mischief were able to kindle a grave turmoil in that city. Its immediate cause was the action of a certain Seyyid from Kashan, who was living in the Madrisi-i-Darush Shafar, and whom the well-known Seyyid Muhammad had taken into his confidence and claimed to have converted to the Bab's teachings. Mirza Muhammad Hussein-i-Kirmani, who lodged in that same Madrisi, and who was a well-known lecturer on the metaphysical doctrines of Islam, attempted several times to induce Sayyid Muhammad, who was one of his pupils, to break off his acquaintance with that Sayyid, whom he believed to be unreliable, and to refuse him admittance to the gathering of the believers. Sayyid Muhammad refused, however, to be admonished by this warning, and continued to associate with him until the beginning of the month of Rabi'ul Thani in the year A.H. 1266, the 14th of February to the 15th of March, A.D. 1850, at which time the treacherous Sayyid went to a certain Sayyid Hussein, one of the Alamas of Kashan, and delivered into his hands the names and addresses of about 50 of the believers who were then residing in Tehran. That same list was immediately submitted by Sayyid Hussein to Mahmud Khan-i-Kalantar, who ordered that all of them be arrested. 14 of them were seized and brought before the authorities. On the day they were captured, I happened to be with my brother and my maternal uncle, who had arrived from Zarand and had lodged in the caravanserai outside the gate of Nor. The next morning they departed for Zarand, and as I returned to the Madrisi-i-Darush Shafar, I discovered in my room a package upon which was placed a letter addressed to me by Mirza Ahmad. That letter informed me that the treacherous Sayyid had at last denounced us and had raised a violent commotion in the capital. "The package, which I have left in this room," he wrote, "contains all the sacred writings that are in my possession. If you ever reach this place in safety, take them to the caravanserai of Haji Nad Ali, where you will find in one of its rooms a man bearing that name, a native of Kazvin, to whom you will deliver the package together with the letter which accompanies it. From thence you will proceed immediately to the Masjid-i-Shah, where I hope to be able to meet you." Following his directions, I delivered the package to the Haji and succeeded in reaching the Masjid, where I met Mirza Ahmad and heard him relate how he had been assailed and had sought refuge in the Masjid, in the precincts of which he was immune from further attack. In the meantime, Baha'u'llah had sent from the Madrisi-i-Sadr a message to Mirza Ahmad informing him of the designs of the Amir Nizam, who had, already on 3 different occasions, demanded his arrest from the Imam Jumi. He was also warned that the Amir ignoring the right of asylum with which the Majid had been invested, intended to arrest those who had sought refuge in that sanctuary. Mirza Ahmad was urged to leave in disguise for Qum and was charged to direct me to return to my home in Sarand. Meanwhile, my relations, who had recognized me in the Masjid-i-Shah, pressed me to leave for Sarand, pleading that my father, who had been misinformed of my arrest and impending execution, was in grave distress, and that it was my duty to hasten and relieve him of his anxieties. Acting on the advice of Mirza Ahmad, who counseled me to seize this God-given opportunity, I left for Sarand and celebrated the feast of Nowruz with my family, a feast that was doubly blessed inasmuch as it coincided with the 5th day of Jamadi-ul Awwal in the year A.H. 1266, AD 1850, the anniversary of the day on which the Bab had declared his mission. The Nowruz of that year has been mentioned in the Kitab-i Panj Shan, one of the last works of the Bab. The 6th Nowruz, he wrote in that book, after the declaration of the point of the Bayan, has fallen on the 5th day of Jamadi-ul Awwal, in the 7th lunar year after that same declaration. In that same passage, the Bab alludes to the fact that the Nowruz of that year would be his last that he was destined to celebrate on this earth. In the midst of the festivities which my relatives celebrated in Sarand, my heart was set upon Tehran, and my thoughts centered around the fate which might have befallen my fellow disciples in that agitated city. I longed to hear of their safety. Though in the house of my father and surrounded with the solicitude of my parents, I felt oppressed by the thought of being severed from that little band, whose perils I could well imagine, and whose afflictions I longed to share. The terrible suspense under which I lived, while confined in my home, was unexpectedly relieved by the arrival of Sadiq-i Tabrizi, who came from Tehran and was received in the house of my father. Though delivering me from the uncertainties which had been weighing so heavily upon me, he, to my profound horror, unfolded to my ears a tale of such terrifying cruelty that the anxieties of suspense paled before the ghastly light which that lurid story cast upon my heart. The circumstances of the martyrdom of my arrested brethren in Tehran, for such was their fate, I now proceed to relate. The 14 disciples of the Bab, who had been captured, remained incarcerated in the house of Mahmud Khan-i Kalantar from the 1st to the 22nd day of the month of Rabi'u Thani, 14th of February to the 15th of March, AD 1850. Tahiri was also confined on the upper floor of that same house. Every kind of ill treatment was inflicted upon them. Their persecutors sought by every device to induce them to supply the information they required, but failed to obtain a satisfactory answer. Among the captives was a certain Muhammad Hussein-i Maraghi, who obstinately refused to utter a single word despite the severe pressure that was brought to bear upon him. They tortured him. They resolved to do every possible measure in order to extort from him any hint that could serve their purpose, but failed to achieve their end. Such was his unswerving obstinacy that his oppressors thought him to be dumb. They asked Haji Mullah Ismail, who had converted him to his faith, whether or not he could talk. "He is mute, but not dumb," he replied. "He is fluent of speech and free from any impediment." He had no sooner called him by his name than the victim answered, assuring him of his readiness to abide by his will. Convinced of their powerlessness to bend their will, they referred the matter to Mahmud Khan, who in his turn submitted their case to the Amir Nizam, Mirza Taqi Khan, the Grand Vizier of Nasir-ud-Din Shah. The sovereign in those days refrained from any direct interference in matters pertaining to the affairs of the persecuted community, and was often ignorant of the decisions that were being made with regard to its members. His Grand Vizier was invested with plenary powers to deal with them as he saw fit. No one questioned his decisions, nor dared disapprove of the manner in which he exercised his authority. He immediately issued a peremptory order threatening with execution whoever among those 14 prisoners was unwilling to recant his faith. 7 were compelled to yield to the pressure that was brought to bear upon them, and were immediately released. The remaining 7 constitute the 7 martyrs of Tehran. 1. Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali, surnamed Kal-i-Azam, the Bab's maternal uncle, and one of the leading merchants of Shiraz. It was this same uncle into whose custody the Bab, after the death of his father, was entrusted, and who, on his nephew's return from his pilgrimage to Hijaz and his arrest by Hussein Khan, assumed undivided responsibility for him by pledging his word in writing. It was he who surrounded him, while under his care with unfailing solicitude, who served him with such devotion, and who acted as intermediary between him and the hosts of his followers who flocked to Shiraz to see him. His only child, a Seyyid Javad, died in infancy. Towards the middle of the year A8 1265, AD 1848-9, this same Haji Mirza Seyyid Ali left Shiraz and visited the Bab in the castle of Shirik. From thence he went to Tehran, and though having no special occupation, remained in that city until the outbreak of the sedition which brought about eventually his martyrdom. Though his friends appealed to him to escape the turmoil that was fast approaching, he refused to heed their counsel and faced, until his last hour, with complete resignation, the persecution to which he was subjected. A considerable number, among the more affluent merchants of his acquaintance, offered to pay his ransom, an offer which he rejected. Finally, he was brought before the Amir Nizam. The chief magistrate of this realm, the Grand Vizier informed him, is loath to inflict the slightest injury upon the Prophet's descendants. Eminent merchants of Shiraz and Tehran are willing, nay, eager, to pay your ransom. The Malikut Tujar has even interceded in your behalf. A word of recantation from you is sufficient to set you free and ensure your return with honours to your native city. I pledge my word that, should you be willing to acquiesce, the remaining days of your life will be spent with honour and dignity under the sheltering shadow of your sovereign. Your Excellency, boldly replied Haji Mirza Seyyid Ali, if others before me, who joyously quaffed the cup of martyrdom, have chosen to reject an appeal such as the one you now make to me, know of a certainty that I am no less eager to decline such a request. My repudiation of the truths enshrined in this revelation would be tantamount to a rejection of all the revelations that have preceded it. To refuse to acknowledge the mission of the Seyyid-i-Bab would be to apostatize from the faith of my forefathers and to deny the divine character, the message which Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, and all the prophets of the past have revealed. God knows that whatever I have heard and read concerning the sayings and doings of those messengers, I have been privileged to witness the same from this youth, this beloved kinsman of mine, from his earliest boyhood to this, the 30th year of his life. Everything in him reminds me of his illustrious ancestor and of the imams of his faith whose lives our recorded traditions have portrayed. I only request of you that you allow me to be the first to lay down my life in the path of my beloved kinsman. The Amir was stupefied by such an answer. In a frenzy of despair, and without uttering a word, he motioned that he be taken out and beheaded. As the victim was being conducted to his death, he was heard several times to repeat the words of Hafiz, "Great is my gratitude to thee, O my God, for having granted so bountifully all I have asked of thee. Hear me, O people," he cried to the multitude that pressed around him. "I have offered myself up as a willing sacrifice in the path of the cause of God. The entire province of Fars, as well as of Iraq, beyond the confines of Persia, will readily testify to my uprightness of conduct, to my sincere piety and noble lineage. For over 1,000 years you have prayed and prayed again that the promised Qaim be made manifest. At the mention of his name, how often have you cried from the depths of your hearts, 'Hasten, O God, his coming. Remove every barrier that stands in the way of his appearance.' And now that he has come, you have driven him to a hopeless exile in a remote and sequestered corner of Azerbaijan, and have risen to exterminate his companions. Were I to invoke the malediction of God upon you, I am certain that his avenging wrath would grievously afflict you. Such is not, however, my prayer. With my last breath I pray that the Almighty may wipe away the stain of your guilt and enable you to awaken from the sleep of heedlessness." A footnote here says, "He took off his turban, and raising his face towards heaven, exclaimed, 'O God, thou art witness of how they are slaying the son of thy most honourable prophet without fault on his part.'" Then he turned to the executioner and recited this verse: "How long shall grief of separation from him slay me? Cut off my head, that love may bestow on me a head." From the Mathnavi, Book 6, page 649, 1, 2, edition Alaoud Dowleh. From A Traveller's Narrative, Note B, page 174. These words stirred his executioner to his very depths. Pretending that the sword he had been holding in readiness in his hand required to be resharpened, he hastily went away, determined never to return again. When I was appointed to this service, he was heard to complain, weeping bitterly the while. They undertook to deliver into my hands only those who had been convicted of murder and highway robbery. I am now ordered by them to shed the blood of one no less holy than the Imam Musa-i Kazim himself. Footnote here says the seventh Imam. Shortly after, he departed for Khorasan, and there sought to earn his livelihood as a porter and crier. To the believers of that province he recounted the tale of that tragedy, and expressed his repentance of the act which he had been compelled to perpetrate. Every time he recalled that incident, every time the name of Haji Mirza Syed Ali was mentioned to him, tears which he could not repress flowed from his eyes, tears that were a witness to the affection which that holy man had instilled into his heart. 2. Mirza Qurban Ali, a native of Bafurush in the province of Mazindaran, and an outstanding figure in the community known by the name of Nimatullahi. He was a man of sincere piety and endowed with great nobleness of nature. Such was the purity of his life that a considerable number among the notables of Mazindaran, of Khorasan, and Tehran had pledged him their loyalty, and regarded him as the very embodiment of virtue. Such was the esteem in which he was held by his countrymen that, on the occasion of his pilgrimage to Karbala, a vast concourse of devoted admirers thronged his route in order to pay their homage to him. In Hamadan, as well as in Kermanshah, a great number of people were influenced by his personality and joined the company of his followers. Wherever he went, he was greeted with the acclamations of the people. These demonstrations of popular enthusiasm were, however, extremely distasteful to him. He avoided the crowd and disdained the pomp and circumstance of leadership. On his way to Karbala, while passing through Mandalij, a sheikh of considerable influence became so enamored of him that he renounced all that he had formerly cherished, and, leaving his friends and disciples, followed him as far as Yaqubiyyah. Mirza Qurban Ali, however, succeeded in inducing him to return to Mandalij and resume the work which he had abandoned. On his return from his pilgrimage, Mirza Qurban Ali met Hula Hussein, and through him embraced the truth of the cause. Owing to illness, he was unable to join the defenders of the fort of Tabasi, and, but for his unfitness to travel to Mazindaran, would have been the first to join its occupants. Next to Mullah Hussein, among the disciples of the Bab, Vahid was the person to whom he was the most attached. During my visit to Tehran, I was informed that the latter had consecrated his life to the service of the cause, and had risen with exemplary devotion to promote its interests far and wide. I often heard Mirza Qurban Ali, who was then in the capital, deplore that illness. "How greatly I grieve," I heard him several times remark, "to have been deprived of my share of the cup which Mullah Hussein and his companions have quaffed. I long to join Vahid and enroll myself under his banner and strive to make amends for my previous failure." He was preparing to leave Tehran when he was suddenly arrested. His modest attire witnessed to the degree of his detachment. Clad in a white tunic after the manner of the Arabs, cloaked in a coarsely woven abba, and wearing the headdress of the people of Iraq, he seemed, as he walked the streets, the very embodiment of renunciation. He scrupulously adhered to all the observances of his faith, and with exemplary piety performed his devotions. The Bab himself conforms to the observations of his faith in their minutest details, he often remarked. Am I to neglect on my part the things which are observed by my leader?